Now, moving forward, when we talk about Samaria, we need to look at the other societies that also built up in Mesopotamia. Now, Samaria is kind of like the great grandfather of all of them because they were there first and they built a pretty established hardcore society well before Acadia, Babylonia, and Assyria. What happened is that other nomadic groups kind of moved in and built small towns, and those small towns were trading with the Sumerians, kind of grew with Sumerian ideals, eventually created their own kingdoms and sort of built their own large societies that were very much based on the ideas that the Sumerians had. So, in that sense, although the Sumerians did last a long time, 1,500 years before the year zero, so we always count from high to low before zero, so 3,500 to 2000 BCE, before Common Era. And they last, I mean, that's a 1,500-year civilization. That's pretty sweet, right? Acadia, the Akkadians, northern part of that side of the Fertile Crescent. I'll show you that map in a second. And you've got them around from 2340 to 2180. So they're around during the time the Sumerians still exist, right? And the Akkadians are only around for a couple hundred years before they're basically absorbed back into the Sumerian society. Babylon, you'll notice when they show up, 1830 to 1500, they're around for quite a while. This is the Hammurabi years, which we'll talk about too, meaning he was a king during that time. And then this is a second era that we'll talk about later, not this first part of Mesopotamia history, because that's something different. But 1830 to 1500 is, so the Sumerians are first, the Akkadians come second, but are gone before the Sumerians are. Then the Babylonians come third, right? And then you've got the Assyrians. And the Assyrians are going to come in at a very interesting time. They're going to basically take over everybody, all right? And they have their own special place in our lecture today. So let's talk a little bit about the Akkadians. Again, the Akkadians are these guys, all right? So the Akkadians pop in. Samaria is still there, all right? And it's Sargon the Great. He's this famous dude that becomes a king of the city-state of Akkadia. So Sargon unifies the lower Mesopotamian area. He actually conquers and rules Samaria. Samaria at this point is a vassal state, right? It's a conquered state of Sumerians that are simply paying tribute, if you will, to Sargon the Great of Akkadia. So the Akkadians are now in charge of Sumerian territory, but Samaria is not gone. They're just, being ruled by these guys. The new capital of all the people that live in that southern part of Mesopotamia is called Akkad. Mesopotamian culture, basically the Akkadians are going to spread Sumerian culture throughout the region, right? And then they're going to be conquered by other invaders that come in later. That's just the Akkadians, and those invaders we'll talk about here in a second. All right. Not much to say about them. Here's an idea. The red and the black and the green, these are all different forms of areas where the Akkadians rule. And you can see how far they went. They're all the way up here, and then one very western town way over here, and then everything else is right along this part of the crescent, down into the older part, and here's the newer area being more recently settled, right? That's a pretty good sized empire, even though it only lasts a couple hundred years. All right, so the Babylonians come in, right? When the Babylonians come in, they set up a city right here, okay? And so here's here's Babylon, right between the narrowest point of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Again, that's like pretty much right there. All right. The Babylonians will actually be the next empire. So we might actually say that the Akkadians are the first real empire, and Sargon the Great is the first emperor of Mesopotamian history. Because although the Sumerians had their own large city-state kingdoms, they had never really conquered a bunch of other people, whereas the Akkadians do. They conquer the Sumerians and any city-state that's in their way, and they do it successfully, right? So the Akkadians are really the first empire of Mesopotamian history. Then the Babylonians come in, and pretty quickly they create an empire because they conquered a bunch of other groups. So that's this whole region is going to be Babylonian, and and pretty soon you're going to have a Babylonian empire that grows in power, right, and in strength, and takes over this whole region here. And then there's this other group that shows up. All right. So let's talk about the probably the golden age of Babylonia. All right, of Babylon, King Hammurabi's era. Okay, that's when we say the golden age. I'm not sure that's being legit because really we just have more records because this guy was a huge writer. He put down all kinds of things into clay tablets and stone even tablets that would last longer, even into the modern day, including a whole bunch of new laws. And you might say that the very first legal system that really makes any codified sense is really King Hammurabi's legal system from Babylon. So this guy's an Amorite, and all that means, guys, the Amorites, where did the Babylonians come from? The Amorites are a tribal group from way over. So Samaria and Akkadia is way over here. And what happened is that the Amorites, which again are this kind of large tribal group here, simply had some people that kind of went this way and conquered this territory and took over. So they're of Amorite heritage, but they have now become southern Mesopotamians through conquest. So we'll really only talk about King Hammurabi at this point because he's the one where we have the most records from. Okay, and what is his deal? He's a builder of walls. He is a developer of the economy. He grows the empire to be bigger than it had been before, and he creates a legal system that is still the basis of many Western legal systems today. I'm not lying, right? It's an amazing thing. Here's a stylized image of Hammurabi. There's lots of different images of this guy, glorious beard. I should grow one. I don't even know if that's all real. Do you think they actually had like that, or was that like a fake ceremonial beard thing that went over the real beard? That's what we need to find out. It's a research project for somebody. All right, and here's an image here. You'll hear about this in a video I'm going to play in just a minute. But the deal is you've got Hammurabi, who is getting a legal code from a god. So this is actually the very top. The rest of the stele or the writings is right here. This is the very top of it, which is showing that Hammurabi didn't make up his own legal code. He's getting it from God, which is similar to Moses, for instance, in Judeo-Christian tradition, going to the top of Mount Sinai and getting the Ten Commandments from God, right? It's that concept that you have a divine intervention almost in human society somehow. Okay? This lends it legitimacy to the people. This is the territory of the Babylonians. All right, this large region that the Babylonians will rule. Now, the Assyrians come from the city of Assur, so the Assyrians, and they're here and they're already here. The Assyrians are already around. They're hanging out. They're growing in power while Babylon is an empire. Okay, and King Hammurabi will actually fight against the people of Assur a few times. Eventually, Babylon will start to decline in power and influence. It gets stagnant like every society eventually does of human creation. And these guys will see their moment to kind of grow and take over. Okay, but right now we're not at that point. Some images here of the Babylonians, math. There's some fun math for you to work out. Numbers that the Babylonians come up with, advanced mathematical skills that these guys had. And finally, again, the Hammurabic Code, of which you will have an assignment for in your current module this week. 282 laws inscribed on a stone pillar, right? And these are your notes, right? These are your lecture-based notes that you can pause the screen and write these down if you want to. It's also in the textbook, okay? But this is an important part here. Punishments were designed to fit the crimes, as people must be responsible for their own actions. Really what's going on here, guys, is there's a point in time where your society grows big enough that if you're the king, you are also a judge. And kings acted for a few days a month as a judge over their territory. Now Hammurabi was one of those kings who had a big enough empire that he was able to give the job of judging to his governors and that sort of thing throughout his empire, so that he didn't have to do it all. Right? It's just that even those guys, rulers of small towns and of the other cities that were of Babylonian nature, at some point you just get tired of people coming and complaining. Oh, this guy stole my cattle, or that guy, you know, um, uh, committed adultery with my wife, and blah 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 blah. This guy is a thief. And eventually you want to go hunting, or listen to nice music, or hang out with your concubines. So you want to find a way to make it easier. So Hammurabi makes a legal code that is so specifically laid out that laying out the law to the people, that it gets to a point where it's super easy. It's like black and white. This guy did this. The answer is, here's the rule, right? This guy did this. The answer is the rule, and the punishment is carried out. And it was so clear that and I don't know if this is true or not, because we don't have those records. They didn't keep this kind of data, at least not that we know of. But I kind of wonder if it helped to cut down on basic, minor crimes, because it was so harsh. Very harsh. If you punch some guy, then that guy's son gets to come and stab you, kind of stuff. It's like super harsh rules, and I'll give you some examples in your assignment this week. But there is one thing that's very interesting about the Hammurabi Code, and that is that if you're wealthy, you can pay money instead of being punished. So that is not abnormal in modern society either, is it? If you have money, sometimes your wealth gets you out of the same punishment that people without money would get, whether that's prison time, or some kind of death sentence, or some kind of harsh punishment of some other nature, right? And that's something Hammurabi's code has. All right. So punishments were designed to fit the crimes, but the punishments were also designed to fit your wealth and status. Let's just keep that in mind, which is an important idea. It shows us that the ideas of wealth and status and the stratification of society was already in full play, right? And right here, the origin. This is the first time in any human record where we even have the phrase "an eye for an eye." Not in the Judeo-Christian Bible. All right, that actually shows up later. In fact, this might have been an influence of the phrasing of that in the Old Testament of the Judeo-Christian Bible. An eye for an eye comes from him. All right. So here we go to finish that up, and then I've got a video for you that will include um, the Hammurabic Code, and then I'm going to move on to the Assyrians. So Hammurabic Code, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, and we're back. So there you go. I hope that that helped to explain this. Moves us on to the last topic of this lecture, the Assyrian. I've got some video for you on this one too. 10th century before Common Era, before zero really, Assyria emerges as a dominant force. So the Assyrians from the city of Assur are up here. Okay. Now, they're an important trading zone, right? Hammurabi is going to finally die. And after Hammurabi, things kind of fell apart where various people were kind of, various governors and whatnot were fighting against each other, and things just collapsed. While that was happening, the Assyrians simply moved in and took over. Okay, the Assyrians had developed a good Babylonian style military system. The Assyrians will actually create one of the first standing armies in human history, meaning they actually took people and had them sign up for for service in the military. Whereas before these guys, it was almost medieval feudal, where you had people who were trained to fight, but they were only called up at certain times of the year. We're talking about a year-round army with the Assyrians. Okay, very warlike culture. And the Assyrians would conquer other cultures like the Sumerians again, or or the Babylonians, and simply make those guys pay money or product, okay, as tribute. Whew, these are scary dudes. We're going to talk about them, but these are scary dudes. All right, the Assyrians. When we say rule by fear, well, we know that because the Assyrians kept really, really solid records of their conquests, and they made big, giant billboards, really, in their palaces about their conquest and everything that they did to their enemies and how horrible they were to their enemies. And this was designed so that if a foreign head of state walked into your palace, and you were an Assyrian, that foreign head of state knew immediately what would happen, if you did anything to tick these guys off. All right, it was kind of a brilliant move on their part. These were not nice people. These Assyrians. Something that I think is fascinating about the Assyrians, you guys, is that their entire religious political system was based on them always winning. And if they lost, it meant that they had lost the power of their gods. If their gods had left. So the Assyrians rule for quite a while. They even conquer Israel, which was a thing at the time. And the Assyrians take the Israelites and other tribal peoples as well, and basically either move them around their empire or enslave them entirely. And the Assyrians will do this to the Israelites and everybody else too. All right, that they conquer. So permanent army, better weapons than everybody else. They have bronze and iron. Bronze, you guys, bronze is pretty strong. If you ever learn to work bronze, it's pretty fun to do. You take copper and mix it with a little bit of tin, and you got bronze. Brass is actually copper and a little bit of zinc, and it's not as strong. But bronze with a little bit of tin, like 10% or less of tin, and you've got bronze, and bronze is awesome. It's awesome stuff. Iron is even better, but bronze is pretty fantastic. So. Um, But let's play the videos of the Assyrians, which will close out this lecture. There won't be more slides after this. All right. I hope that that helps. Yeah. Before we move on, I wanted to tell you that if you're ever driving up 5 freeway, if you're not from California, it's I-5 or Interstate 5. But the 5 freeway, as you're driving up north on your right side, you'll see a big mall. That big mall used to be a rubber factory for tires and whatnot, and the exterior of that rubber factory is still there because it's a landmark now. It's a historic landmark. Interestingly, back in the I think it was the 20s, the people that built this thing, this facade around the factory that was right next to this little Interstate 5 at the time, decided to copy Assyrian motifs. So when you drive by it, it looks exactly like you're passing by an Assyrian palace. I think it's amazing. So here's how California remembers the Assyrians, on this what is now an outlet mall, right? But these are Assyrian motifs here. We will this is a god here and a ruler. We will show you some of the video, right? So if you want to go shop with the Assyrians, there you go. Okay. To finish this off then with this slide before I give you the videos of the Assyrians, okay? Samaria, all right, first guys, right here. Um, Irrigation, the wheel, trade, and bartering, writing. They're just the first guys to do what they did. They are the gift to Mesopotamia. The Babylonians simply advanced civilization by adding in. You take the Sumerians here and add in private land ownership, the development of advanced mathematics, calendars, right, and the Hammurabic law code, which will continue to be used after Hammurabi dies throughout Mesopotamia by multiple cultures. The first of its kind to be so specific and so easy to use. And then, of course, the Assyrians, who create the most powerful empire that Mesopotamia had ever seen, and also developed the use of advanced bronze and iron technology. Okay, so who is the best? It really depends on how you define it, right? The Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians. It's up to you to decide that, I suppose. It's an opinion. Okay, here is a bit about the Assyrians.
Before the sun never set on the British Empire, before Genghis Khan swept the steppe, before Rome extended its influence to encircle the Mediterranean Sea, there was ancient Assyria. Considered by historians to be the first true empire, Assyria's innovations laid the groundwork for every superpower that's followed. At its height, in the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire stretched across modern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and parts of Turkey, Iran, and Egypt. Its wonders included a vast library and large botanical and zoological park. But the story of Assyria's rise to dominance began many centuries earlier, in the late Bronze Age, in a city called Ashur. Ashur was a tin and textiles trading center located along the Tigris River in northern Iraq. It shared its name with a god thought to be an embodiment of the city and later of the entire empire. For the administration-minded Assyrians, politics and religion were closely linked. Around 1300 BCE, a high priest named Ashur-ubillit I took the title of king and initiated a tradition of military campaigns, effectively transforming Assyria from a city-state to a territorial state. This meant that a single administrative entity oversaw many places, cultures, and peoples. For the next 150 years, Assyria extended its reach and thrived. In the 12th century BCE, a mysterious catastrophe that still bewilders archaeologists caused the Assyrians to lose much of their territory. A few hundred years later, however, Assyrian kings began a new round of conquests. This time, they honed their administrative system into an empire that would last generations. Assyrians were military innovators and merciless conquerors. During their conquests, they used siege tactics and cruel punishments for those who opposed them, including impalement and flaying. The growth of their empire was due in part to their strategy of deporting local populations, then shifting them around the empire to fulfill different needs. This broke people's bonds with their homelands and severed loyalties among local groups. Once the Assyrians conquered an area, they built cities connected by well-maintained royal roads. Often, when a new king came to power, he would build a new capital. With each move, new palaces and temples were erected and lavishly decorated. Although kings claimed absolute power, we know that an extensive system of courtiers, provincial officials, and scholars influenced affairs. At least one woman, Samuramat, ruled the kingdom. Assyrian rulers celebrated their military excursions by having representations of their exploits carved into the walls of their newly built palaces. But despite the picture of a ruthless war state projected by these records, the Assyrian kings were also interested in the cultural traditions of the region, especially those of Babylonia, a separate state to the south. Babylonia had been a cultural leader for millennia, stretching back to the beginning of writing at the end of the 4th millennium BCE. Assyria saw itself as the inheritor and protector of this tradition. Assyrian rulers supported scholars in specialities ranging from medicine to magic, and the capital cities, like Nineveh, were home to elaborate parks and gardens that housed plants and animals from around the empire. One of Assyria's final rulers, Ashurbanipal, sent scholars throughout Babylonia to gather up and copy ancient literary works. Ashurbanipal's library took the form of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform in the languages of Akkadian and Sumerian. The library was lost during the final sack of Nineveh in 612 BCE, but thanks to a 19th century archaeological excavation, many masterpieces of ancient literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Babylonian creation epic, survive today. After centuries of rule, the Assyrian Empire fell to the Babylonians and Medes between 612 and 609 BCE. Yet the innovations that the Assyrians pioneered live on. Their emphasis on constant innovation, efficient administration, and excellent infrastructure set the standard for every empire that's followed them in the region and across the globe.